I knew you were a ritualist. You have succeeded in using my only daughter to renew your pledge with the devil. Once upon a time, there lived a little girl who came to the big city to live with her rich auntie. Her name was Bola, and her father sent her to live with his stepsister, Titi. Titi was an extremely wealthy woman who had amassed so much wealth in life but was still unmarried. Her stepbrother, Deli, pleaded with her to allow his daughter, Bola, to come live with her in the big city. He detailed how he wanted a good life for his daughter, away from the village, and Titi agreed to take Bola to the city. She promised to enroll Bola in a good school and look after her like her own daughter. Deli was delighted as he bade his daughter farewell and watched her drive off in his sister's luxurious SUV. After a few hours, they arrived in the big city, and Bola could not believe her eyes. The buildings were so huge, a stark contrast to the huts that Bola was used to seeing in the village. They drove through beautiful streets with unique flowers, and Bola was full of excitement. They finally arrived at Titi's home, and Bola could not help but stare in amazement. She could not believe that her auntie lived in such a big and beautiful house. Once inside, Bola could not stop admiring everything. It all looked so beautiful. She could only imagine how heaven would look if a house on earth could be this stunning. She was escorted to a very big room, which her auntie said was her room. This was a dream come true for Bola, whose entire house in the village was smaller than her new bedroom. The next morning, her auntie, Titi, enrolled her in a very good school in the heart of the city. She gave Bola directions back home, as their house was not too far from the school, and left in a hurry for a very important meeting. Bola was so excited to resume school. When she arrived in her classroom, she realized that the school was very different from her village school. The children in her class seemed to be from wealthy homes, and it was not long before Bola began to feel insecure. She kept to herself as the other girls refused to associate with her. Her village accent and her odd ways of doing things made it obvious that she was not as exposed as they were. During their lunch break, while the other children adhered to strict etiquette, Bola used her bare fingers to eat her food. They all laughed and pointed at her, calling her all sorts of belittling names. Unable to withstand their mockery, Bola ran away from their presence and locked herself in the restroom, too ashamed to return to her class. Bola remained in the restroom until the school bell went off. She then sneaked out of school, hoping not to be seen by the mean girls who had laughed at her all day. She walked briskly for a few minutes, terrified of what would happen if any of the girls caught sight of her. After a few minutes, Bola decided to slow down her pace. Little did she know that the mean girls were trailing her. Just as they were about to surround Bola, a small car pulled up next to her. A man told Bola that her auntie had sent him to pick her up from school. Bola heaved a sigh of relief as she got into the car, thankful for her auntie's timely intervention. They zoomed off, and the school bullies stood there, watching her get away. Later that evening, her auntie Titi returned home to find the house empty. She called out for Bola, but no one seemed to be home. She looked up at the clock and realized that it was already 7 in the evening. Bola should be home by now, she thought to herself as she drove off to the school to check if she was still there. The school gate was shut, and no students seemed to be around. She spoke to the school security, who informed her that the school was empty. Confused as to where Bola could have gone, Titi returned home and decided to wait. She waited for hours until it was almost midnight, but Bola did not return. Could she have missed her way? Titi thought to herself as she got into her car and drove around, hoping to find Bola. To her utter confusion, Bola was nowhere to be found. The next morning, Titi went straight to the school to report that Bola had never returned home the previous day. A formal investigation was carried out, and the school authorities, after interviewing the students, found out that Bola had driven off in a red car the previous afternoon with a man whom her auntie had sent to pick her up from school. The principal also learned that Bola had cried and run out of her class because her classmates laughed at her, and cautioned the students to desist from such acts. The school principal relayed his findings to Titi, who denied sending any man to pick Bola up from school. She returned home and wondered who the strange man could be. Titi waited patiently for Bola to return, but she never did. Days passed, and no one had seen or heard from Bola. Sensing that something terrible might have happened to her, Titi reported to the police, who began to search the state for her. She decided to visit the village to see if Bola might have found her way back to her father's, but no one in the village seemed to have seen her. Her father was so distraught, he could not imagine that his daughter, whom he had just sent to the big city with his sister, was missing. Titi tried to explain what had happened, but Deli seemed not to believe her story. "I knew you were a ritualist. You have succeeded in using my only daughter to renew your pledge with the devil," he said. Titi stood there and watched as Deli called on the villagers for help, narrating how he had handed his daughter over to his stepsister to take to the city and how she had just returned to inform him that his daughter was missing. The villagers murmured among themselves, suspecting that Titi had a hand in the disappearance of her niece. "She has used the poor girl for ritual," they whispered among themselves as they stared at her angrily. Titi, sensing that her life was now in danger, got into her car to drive off. However, the villagers surrounded her car and shattered all her windows. Titi watched as the people dragged her out of her car and began to beat her up. They called her a ritualist and took her before the village chiefs. Titi tried to explain to the chiefs that she had no hand in Bola's disappearance, but the chiefs found it hard to believe, as they wondered how Titi had made all her money in the city. The men of the village were not used to seeing a woman with such wealth, so it was easy to accuse her of being a ritualist. Titi knelt before them and pleaded, but no one seemed to listen to her. Deli then suggested that Titi be tied and kept for 7 nights in the sacred shrine of Ogun to see if she was telling the truth. This was a place where the people dreaded, as the spirit residing within the shrine was known to be very violent and deadly. Titi knew how dangerous the spirit was and pleaded with the elders to spare her life. She confessed that she was the one behind Bola's disappearance. She revealed that Bola was still alive in the city at a location only she knew about. The entire village gasped in shock as the elders ordered her to return to the city to bring Bola back to the village. Titi set out for the village park immediately. Her car had been badly damaged by the villagers, so she had no option but to find a public bus to the city. When she arrived at the bus park, she was told that there were no buses available. Titi was exhausted. The ordeal she had faced at the hands of her stepbrother and the entire village terrified her. As she stood in the corner, thinking of all the terrible things that could have happened to her, Titi was lost in her thoughts when a young woman approached her to ask if all was well. She narrated all that had happened and how she had to lie to the village elders to avoid being tied up in the evil shrine of Ogun for 7 days. The young woman sympathized with her and told Titi that it was too late to leave for the city as there were no buses. She invited Titi to her home to spend the night, as the park was not a place for a woman to be after dark. At 9:40, Titi was so grateful to the young woman as she followed her home. When they arrived, the young woman gave Titi her spare room to sleep in and served her some food, assuring her that everything would work out for the best. These words put Titi at ease as she ate her food and went to bed. By morning, Titi prepared to leave for the city. She thanked the kind woman for her hospitality despite not knowing who she was. She then headed out and saw something she had never expected to see. Titi saw her stepbrother standing in the corner with his daughter, Bola. Her eyes opened in shock as she realized that he was the one behind his own daughter's kidnapping. She hid in the corner as she watched him leave. Titi could not believe her eyes. She quickly returned to see the village elders, who were shocked to see her without the child. "Where is she?" they asked angrily. Titi pleaded with the elders to send some men to follow her. She led them to the house where she had last seen Bola, and to their amazement, they found Bola in the heart of her father's concubine. Her father, Deli, had always been so jealous of his stepsister, Titi. He could not understand why she had to be the wealthy one. At one point, he even convinced himself that his sister used his destiny to make money, so he plotted to ruin her life by ensuring that she was locked up in the shrine of Ogun. He hoped to use his evil charms to kill her and make the villagers believe that she was killed by Ogun. This would then prove to them that his sister was truly a ritualist. This was the only way he believed he could inherit all of his sister's wealth. The elders were enraged to realize that Deli had deceived them into accusing his innocent sister of a crime she did not commit. They immediately tied him up and locked him in the shrine of the evil Ogun, who took his life for being evil. Titi, though relieved that the truth had been exposed, was deeply saddened by her stepbrother's betrayal and death. She knew that Bola was the only family she had left, so she vowed to take good care of her. They both returned to the big city, where Titi ensured that Bola felt secure and loved. She enrolled her in a new school where Bola quickly made friends who accepted her for who she was. Over time, Bola flourished in her new school, and the bond between her and her auntie grew stronger. They lived happily in the big city, and Titi took care of Bola like her own daughter. Their bond became unbreakable, like that of a mother and daughter. The lesson to be learned from this story is that jealousy and envy are dangerous traits that can ruin one's life. We should learn to be content with what we have, as greed only leads to downfall and misery. Finally, we should learn to be resilient in the face of adversity, as doing so can help us see the light at the end of the tunnel. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.
Thank you for watching.
Subscribe to my channel.